I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof, the gambrels of the sky. Of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise.
To gather paradise. Isn't that a lovely thought? Those words were written by poet Emily Dickinson. Like Walt Whitman, Dickinson created an innovative writing style that was a little baffling because it was so different from anything that had ever been done before. And also like Walt Whitman, Dickinson's poetry resonated with themes that echoed transcendentalism. She wrote about nature and spirituality, about individualism and self-reliance, and hope and immortality. Of course, she also wrote about death, darkness, hopelessness, and despair, or about very specific scientific observations. Just like her style, Dickinson's themes were hard to put into a box. That's why she's often referred to as enigmatic. It's hard to classify her work or even to understand the way she thought. Although Emily Dickinson's poetry was not widely known until after her death, she has become one of America's best-loved poets. In today's video, we'll delve into the life and times of this prolific and enigmatic poet, learn about her very unique poetry, and learn about her literary legacy and how it came to be. And as we study the work of this beloved poet, perhaps we'll gather a bit of paradise.
I hide myself within my flower that fading from your vase, you unsuspecting feel for me almost a loneliness.
You may recall that transcendentalism was an outgrowth of Romanticism that first appeared on the scene in 1830. Guess what else happened in 1830? Emily Dickinson was born in Amherst, Massachusetts on December 10, 1830, the same year that transcendentalism began to emerge. Originally built for her grandparents, the Dickinson home was known as the Homestead. The house is preserved today as part of the Emily Dickinson Museum in Amherst. Dickinson was the middle child of Edward and Emily Norcross Dickinson. She had an older brother, Austin, and a younger sister, Lavinia. Dickinson was educated at Amherst Academy, which prided itself in providing exceptional educational opportunities for young women. Dickinson excelled at Amherst Academy, particularly in science, Latin, and composition. In 1847, Dickinson left home to attend the Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, but she only stayed for 1 year. Partly she was homesick, and partly she was uncomfortable with the religious demands of the institution. Once she returned home, Dickinson's life began to take a more reclusive turn. It's recorded that she spent much of her time in her bedroom, writing letters and poems. Though she maintained close relationships with a few friends and family members, her withdrawal from society deepened over time. However, as her withdrawal deepened, her writing exploded. Between the years 1858 and 1865, from just prior to the Civil War until the year it ended, Dickinson went through an intense, highly productive period of writing in which she produced about 1,100 of her nearly 1,800 poems. And this poetry, like I said earlier, was different from anything that had been out there at the time. Let's take a look at this highly unique style of Dickinson's writing.
If it had no pencil, would it try mine, worn now and dull, sweet, writing much to thee? If it had no word, would it make the daisy most as big as I was when it plucked me?
Despite her reclusive lifestyle and the fact that her work was unrecognized during her time, Dickinson's unique style of poetry has impacted generations of writers and readers. So let's examine some key aspects of her distinctive style. First, let's take a look at the form and structure of this poem. There's no title, the lines are short, it's broken into 3 4-line stanzas. From the outside, it looks simple, but honestly, it's pretty complex. For example, what's up with the random capitalization? I mean, we're accustomed to seeing the beginnings of lines capitalized in poetry, and we capitalize proper nouns. But Emily Dickinson often drew attention to certain words by capitalizing them. It's as if she was turning them into proper nouns and thus personifying them. I'm sure you've also noticed the dashes. It's sort of her signature punctuation. The dashes create breaks in the text without giving the communication markers found in other punctuation marks. And let's talk about rhyme for a moment. Dickinson was known for frequently using slant rhyme, words that are similar in sound but do not produce a perfect rhyme. So while I and sky in the second stanza form a perfect rhyme, what about the first stanza? Prose and doors. Close, but not exact. And then there's the third stanza, this and paradise. These words are not exact rhymes, but they're similar enough to create what's called a slant rhyme. You may have also noticed the consistent meter in that poem. I dwell in possibility. Da 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 da. The poem is written in iambic tetrameter, meaning 4 iambs to a line. But not all of Dickinson's poetry had a consistent meter. You'll learn more about Dickinson's use of rhyme and rhythm and dashes and meter and a lot of other characteristics of form that are seen throughout her poetry in this week's lesson. And you should realize that not any of these characteristics of form are accidental. They all serve a function that supports the poem's message. You'll probably notice some consistent themes throughout the week, especially nature, death, and immortality. And you'll notice a lot of vivid imagery, so be on the lookout for what her figurative language is actually representing. The poems are brief, but you'll be guided through repeated readings of each one so that you can discover the complex layers of meaning that exist in every poem. These poems, as well as the lifestyle of this enigmatic artist, have created quite a legacy.
The stars are old that stood for me, the west a little worn, yet newer glows the only gold I ever cared to earn. Presuming on that lone result her infinite disdain, but vanquished her with my defeat, 'twas victory was slain.
While we can count Emily Dickinson among America's most famous and influential poets today, the likelihood of her work finding a broader audience was slim. Most of her work was recopied neatly on high-quality stationery and sewn into small manuscript booklets. No one really knows what she intended to do with those handwritten poems. She didn't seem driven to publish. Only 10 of her poems were published during her lifetime. But she did share her work with a few confidants. Dickinson's friend and sister-in-law, Susan Gilbert Dickinson, encouraged the poet in her younger years and provided feedback on many of her poems. Family friend and correspondent Samuel Bowles, publisher and editor of the influential Springfield Republican, published a few of her poems in his Massachusetts newspaper. Dickinson also shared her poetry with family friend Mabel Loomis Todd, whose relationship with Austin Dickinson caused a rift between Susan Gilbert Dickinson and the poet. And then there was Thomas Wentworth Higginson. He and Dickinson only met in person on 2 occasions, but their correspondence lasted for decades. She sent him poems, and he provided feedback. Emily Dickinson died in 1886 at the age of 55. Her sister Lavinia discovered her nearly 1,800 poems, and they could have been lost to history forever. But Lavinia enlisted Todd and Higginson and made sure her sister's unique and beautiful poetry was given to the world. All right, one last thing before I go. Let's take a look at your to-do list for the week. This week, you'll have PDF readings and activities to complete, as well as daily online practice. At the end of the week, you'll have an online assessment, reflection questions, some refresh on your writing practice, and an assignment for writing some found poetry. To create found poetry, you'll borrow words and phrases from Dickinson's poems and reassemble them to create your own poem. Your poem will have at least 12 lines and at least 100 words, and of course, it will present a message that readers can contemplate after reading it. Okay, you're ready! And as you prepare to journey back to the world and work of Emily Dickinson, I can think of no better send-off than to close with words penned by this unique and enthralling American poet.
This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me, the simple news that nature told with tender majesty. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. For love of her, sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me.